and welcome to the Ghosts and Folklore podcast. I'm Mark Rees, and on each episode, I investigate a different, weird, and wonderful subject. And on this episode, we are going to delve into the terrifying case of a changeling, a strange supernatural creature that was secretly swapped for a human child, an incident that would have catastrophic effects on the family concerned. And so, to begin, at the beginning. And while I've spoken about changelings on this podcast in the past, just in case you missed those episodes, and I hope you have a good excuse for missing those episodes, I thought I'd start with a quick recap just to bring everyone up to speed by looking at a description of a changeling from Welsh folklore. And Welsh folklore tells us that when the fairies, the Tylwyth Teg as they are known in Welsh, when the fairies have a sickly, deformed child, they would often steal a human child and swap them over. So, if the fairies have a sickly child they want to get rid of, they swap it for a fit and healthy human child. And this wasn't necessarily bad news for the human child. They got to go off and live in the fairy realm. And they very rarely returned from this realm. They stayed there living the good life for eternity, for however long it was, but they were occasionally glimpsed by mere mortals on the rare occasion they were offered a view into the fairy realm. On the other hand, the substitute baby, the fairy's sickly baby, which had been left in our world, which are known as changelings or crimbillion in Welsh. These creatures are described as strange in appearance, ill-tempered, or unnaturally wise beyond their years. So if you know anyone who fits that description, strange in appearance, ill-tempered, or unnaturally wise beyond their years, maybe you're sitting next to such a person right now, then maybe, just maybe, they are indeed a changeling, a crimbil in disguise. Now, of course, you can't just go around accusing random people, or maybe they aren't random, maybe it's friends and family, of being a changeling. But you can look out for the telltale signs, because folktales tell us that the crimbil, the changeling, might betray itself. There are some clues that somebody is really a changeling, like playing eerie music, by speaking with adult intelligence, or consuming excessive food. So, just to recap, if you know somebody who is strange in appearance, ill-tempered, unnaturally wise beyond their years, plays eerie music, speaks with adult intelligence, and consumes excessive amounts of food, there's a pretty good chance, I'd say a 99.99999% chance that that person is indeed a changeling, and if indeed you are still sitting next to them, now might be a good time to make up your excuses and make a sharp exit, or at the very least just shuffle over a little bit. Unless, of course, you're feeling brave and instead of escaping away from this changeling, in fact, you want to expose this person for the strange creature they are, to reveal their true identity to the world. Well, it just so happens that back in the good old days, parents did use various rituals to reveal the true nature of these children, such as placing it near the hearth, quite straightforward, put it by the heat, or by throwing it in the river, slightly less straightforward. So you can expose this changeling by placing it near the hearth or throwing it into the river. And this is one of those moments on this podcast where I feel the need to break the silliness and to stress, please, please, please do not try this at home. No matter how much you might be thinking that person next to you right now ticks all the boxes of a changeling, please do not throw them in any rivers. By all means, put them next to the hearth. If it's a cold day, they might appreciate the warmth, but maybe draw the line at throwing them in the river. I will not be held responsible for any sogginess that occurs as a result of this podcast. Now, moving on, and we've had a quick look at what a changeling is. We've also looked at ways of detecting them, followed by a quick disclaimer. And now it's time to dive into a specific case, the main focus of this episode. And that is the curious case of the Gors Goch changeling. The Gors Goch changeling. And I will explain the meaning of Gors Goch very soon. But this is one of those legends that's been recorded several times over the centuries. And I am going to look at two examples from the late 1800s, both of which share many similarities but also have crucial differences that I think combined give us a much better idea of what the heck might have been going on one fateful night in Gors Goch. And the first of those accounts comes to us from 1870, more than 150 years ago now. And this isn't just any old piece of folklore. This comes to us from an Eisteddfod-winning essay, which means it was judged by peers and deemed to be the best entry received, so not a bad source. And this Eisteddfod-winning essay was written by a Mr. D. Williams of Merionethshire, and it starts like this. There was once a happy family living in a place called Gors Goch. And just to interrupt quickly, and it's only the first line, I'm already interrupting, it doesn't bode well, but just to interrupt quickly, even though Mr. Williams doesn't specify this, the Gors Goch in question is assumed to be the small village near Lampeter in Ceredigion. And Gors Goch is the perfect name for such a tale because it translates as the Red Bog or the Red Swamp, which sounds like a magical place out of a Tolkien book. If you were the Tylwyth Teg looking for a farm to visit, Gors Goch in Lampeter would be right at the top of the list. But back to the tale, and there was once a happy family living in a place called Gors Goch. One night, as usual, they went to bed, but they could not sleep a wink because of a noise outside the house. At last, the master of the house got up and, trembling, inquired what was there and what was wanted. So, if you can picture the scene, we're going back a few centuries before electric lighting at night. There's some loud noises coming from some invisible force seemingly outside. And I've spoken about this before on previous episodes, but it's interesting how activity like this, if it were to happen today, would be described as poltergeist activity. But if you go back a few centuries, exactly the same activity was blamed on the fairy folk. But as belief in the fairy folk dwindled, the activity didn't. The activity continued, and therefore the blame was shifted from the Tylwyth Teg onto some more nasty, fearsome, frightful spirit. And of course, that kind of activity continues to be reported right up to the current day. Although I'm not sure how many people nowadays, if they believed their house was being targeted by a poltergeist or the fairies, would start by trying to strike up a conversation like this man, like the master of the house does when he hears these strange noises outside, who goes to the door and says, "Who's there and what do you want? Who's there and what do you want?" And can you believe it? He gets a reply. And not some cryptic reply in taps and knocks. He gets a specific reply in a voice described as clear and sweet, which answered him thus: "We want a warm place where we can tidy the children. We want a warm place where we can tidy the children." Which I imagine is not the reply anyone was expecting. And just to clarify what they are asking for here, we want a warm place where we can tidy the children. They mean they want a place they can wash and clean and prepare the children. And I think tidy is a very interesting way of saying that, a very Welsh way of saying that, especially nowadays in Wales today. The word tidy has taken on a new meaning. It's a slang word meaning excellent, amazing. That's tidy, that is. This podcast is tidy. In fact, going off on a slight tangent here, but in fact, it's even been used in the X-Men. Yes, the X-Men, the Marvel superheroes, the Marvel mutant team. There is a Welsh character in the X-Men, which actually, I mentioned going off on a tangent, but thinking about it, this ties in very nicely with this episode, because this character is called Pixie. Pixie, the mutant who has fairy wings and effectively is a member of the Tylwyth Teg in the Marvel superhero universe. And the reason I'm telling you this now is there's a particular page I'm thinking of. I'll share this on social media. I'll put this onto my Facebook page. But there's one particular page where she is fighting bad guys or somebody with Dazzler. And as they blast the bad guys or shoot the bad guys, whatever they're doing, they shout, "Tidy." So there you have it. The Incredible Hulk shouts Hulk smash. The Thing shouts it's clobbering time. Welsh superheroes shout tidy. But anyway, tangent over. Let's get back to the tidy in this episode. A far more conventional use of the word. And this man who has heard this sweet voice outside saying tidy opens the door. He clearly isn't concerned about strangers wanting to come in and tidy their kids, and we're told there entered half full the house of the Tylwyth Teg, the fairy folk, and they began forthwith washing their children, which is a bit unspecific, half full the house, but it does sound like a heck of a lot of fairies washing their children. And when they had finished, we are told, washing their children, they commenced singing, and the singing was entrancing. And that's always an ominous word when it comes to the fairy folk. The singing was entrancing. And it wasn't just singing, there was also dancing, and we are told the singing and dancing was excellent, although how much you'd appreciate it being woken up in the middle of the night with it is another question. But the singing and the dancing was excellent, and if that wasn't enough, they left behind them money, not for a little, for the use of the house. Again, a bit vague. I'm assuming that not for a little means a nice big chunk of money. And afterwards, they came pretty often to the house and received a hearty welcome in consequence of the large presents, all the money they left behind them on the hob. So what started out sounding like a scene from a poltergeist film, strange noises outside the house in the middle of the night, quickly became a scene of joy, of revelry, singing, dancing, and free money. But, and there's always a but in such tales, but it all went horribly wrong. We are told a sad affair took place, which was no less than the exchange of children. No less than the exchange of children. And that's one of the things I love about these old accounts, these old Eisteddfod winning essays. There's no building the tension. There's no messing around with unnecessary details like I do on this podcast. Straight to the point, straight in. The baby was swapped. At last, a sad affair took place, which was no less than an exchange of children. An exchange of children took place. The fairy folk swapped a human child for one of their own changelings. And it was quite easy to detect. There was nothing subtle about this. They didn't swap one baby that looked like the other baby. These weren't twins. The original human baby is described as being a dumpy child, a sweet, pretty, affectionate little dear. But the child which was left in its stead was a sickly, thin, shapeless, ugly being, which did nothing but cry and eat. And although it ate ravenously like a mastiff, it did not grow. Which, fair enough, is quite a change. One moment they're dumpy, sweet, pretty, affectionate. The next they're sickly, thin, shapeless and ugly. Again, maybe you know someone who fits the bill, but don't go chucking them in the river. And at last we are told, and I should warn you, this finale is quite shocking, but once again, our folklorist does not mess around with build-up or any of that frilly nonsense. Straight into the details. At last we are told the wife of Gorsgoch died of a broken heart and so also all her children. But the father lived a long life and became a rich man because his new heir's family brought him abundance of gold and silver. So, to recap quickly, there's a lot going on there in the final sentence. But after the fairies made the switch, as a result, the mother died of a broken heart. So did all of the other children in the house, leaving just the father alone with the changeling. And he became a wealthy man because, of course, the fairy folk kept returning and kept leaving money on the hob. However, all is not as it seems. There is, I believe, a sting in the tail to this story. And I did mention at the start that we'd be looking at two different accounts of the Goch Goch changeling. We've looked at the first. The second one, I think, will shed more light on the events. And this one comes to us from no less an authority than a reverend, which might be an important part of the tale, as you'll discover, but a reverend and a folklorist called Reverend Owen Wynne Jones, who, it has to be said, put a bit more effort into the storytelling side of things. This isn't quite as blunt as the last version, and it contains some very interesting bits of information. And his account was written in the Welsh language, so what follows is a translated version. And he begins by saying, "When the people of the Goch Goch one evening had gone to bed, lo," and that's lo, L-O exclamation mark. And I do love a writer who uses lo because it gives me an opportunity to go all Edgar Allan Poe or Shakespearean on this podcast. But lo, when the people of the Goch Goch one evening had gone to bed, lo, they heard a great row and a disturbance around the house. One could not at all comprehend what it might be that made a noise that time of night. And I appreciate at this point you might be thinking, well, there's not much suspense here. We know exactly what this is because we've heard this story once already. You told us this story moments ago. Fear not, I haven't reached the point where I need to rehash old stories quite yet. And this story does have some big differences coming up. And back to the story, and as a result of this racket outside, we are told that both the husband and the wife had waked up quite unable to make out what there might be out there. What was making this sound? The children also woke, but no one could utter a word. Their tongues had all stuck to the roofs of their mouths. This version really is far more poetic and descriptive. And frozen in fright, unable to move, eventually the husband found the strength, found the courage to rise and to go to the door and ask, "Who is there? What do you want?" And he was answered from without by a small silvery voice which said, "It is room we want to dress our children. It is room we want to dress our children." And maybe that's the one downside of this version is I don't get to use the word tidy again. But it is room we want to dress our children. The door was opened and a dozen small beings came in. So more specific this time, thank you, Reverend. A dozen small beings came in and began to search for an earthen pitcher with water. There they remained for some hours, washing and titivating themselves. And I'll be honest, titivating is a word that I have never said aloud before. I did double check that it wasn't a typo, and I did make sure on Google that it was safe to use on a family-friendly podcast. But I am assured, according to the internet, which is never wrong, titivating means to smarten up, spruce up, or to make something look attractive, or, to put it another way, to make something tidy. But I digress. And lo, as the day was breaking, they went away. The fairies, the Tylwyth Teg, went away, leaving behind them a fine present for the kindness they had received. Often afterwards did the Goch Goch folks have the company of this family. So again, after that initial visit, the fairy folk make returned visits, and the family are more than happy to accept them, assuming there'll be a gift at the end. But On one fateful visit, there was what is described as a fine roll of a pretty baby in his cradle. The fair family came, and as the baby had not been baptized, they took the liberty of changing him for one of their own. And this is a crucial change in the story and gives us a much clearer explanation as to why they made the switch when they did. Because originally, the impression was that they had this sickly baby and they simply wanted to swap it for one that was much healthier. But in this case, it implies they did so because the baby was left unprotected. It was unbaptized. And in the God-fearing folklore of Wales, to be unbaptized is just asking for trouble. And lo, the fairies seized the opportunity and left behind in his stead an abominable creature that would do nothing but cry and scream every day of the week. The mother was nearly breaking her heart on account of the misfortune and greatly afraid of telling anybody about it. And this version does prepare us for the looming tragedy. Of course, I'm sure you all know what's coming. But to continue, everybody got to see there was something wrong at Gorsgoch, which was proved before long by the mother dying of longing for her child. The other children died broken-hearted after their mother, and the husband was left alone with the little elf without anyone to comfort them. But this didn't stop the fairies from visiting. Shortly after, they were back at the hearth to dress their children, and the gift, which had formerly been silver money, became henceforth pure gold. In the course of a few years, the elf became the heir of a large farm, and that is why the old people used to say, "Shoe the elf with gold, and he will grow." Shoe the elf with gold, and he will grow. And I mentioned a sting in the tale, and this to me makes the fairy folks' motivation much clearer and much more sinister. Because in the original version, it implies that after all the tragedy, at least the husband, at least the father, got to live as a rich man for the rest of his life. But what this story tells us is that he didn't live much longer. But when he died, that elfin child, that changeling that he was left with, inherited everything that family had built up. That farm and all that money he'd been given went straight to that changeling. So it isn't really a case of the Tylwyth Teg making this man rich. Rather, it's a case of the Tylwyth Teg stealing everything this family once owned. And who knows, maybe to this day, there's a farm in Wales, possibly in Lampeter, in Ceredigion, wherever it might be. Maybe there are many that are secretly owned by the Tylwyth Teg, stolen from under the noses of the hard-working people who established them. Well, that cheerful thought brings us to the end of the second account of the Gorsgoch changeling, and it also brings us to the end of another episode of the Ghosts and Folklore podcast. And before I do all the usual end of episode nonsense, I just wanted to say quickly, I've mentioned that the 5th anniversary of this podcast is coming up very soon. I know, I'm just as amazed as you are. This thing is still going. But one of the celebration things I'll be doing is a Q&A episode on which I'll try to answer a lot of the questions I get asked quite often, like what are my favorite supposedly haunted places, what's my scariest experience, my favorite folktale, etc., etc. But it would be nice to get some more obscure, some more unusual questions. So if there's any question at all you would like to ask, no matter how ridiculous, you can do so via all the usual places, via my website or via social media. I'm on all the main sites, my Facebook page or Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, whichever your preferred brand of social media is, just get in touch. And as always, if you don't want to miss that Q&A episode or any other episodes that are coming up, please consider pressing the subscribe button and you will never miss an episode, ever. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, you can, of course, leave me a nice review or rating. It all helps. And if you really, really enjoyed it and you'd like to support the podcast going forward and keep it on air, you can treat me to a coffee via my website. In fact, if you do get me a coffee and you include a question, I will do my very best to make sure your questions go to the top of the pile. Of course, I can never promise 100%. It does need to be broadcastable at least, but assuming so, I will do my very, very best to make sure any questions accompanied by a coffee go to the top of the pile. Anyway, that's all coming up in the not too distant future, and if you'd like more ghosts and folklore in the meantime, I've written a number of books about similar weird and wonderful subjects which are available from all good bookshops offline and on. And on that note, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. Diolch yn fawr iawn am wrando. I've been Mark Rees. This has been my Ghosts and Folklore podcast, beaming to you from Wales to the world. And remember, the next time you suspect someone of being a changeling in disguise, it's much safer to warm them by the fire to see what happens than throw them in the river. Tidy. Until next time, Nosta.